Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. We are very excited to have Mr. Anson Cooley of Synergy Bank Consulting with us today to talk about ALLL methodology, how to justify and document your Q factors. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going with the presentation today. We are going to make the presentation available after today's session on our website, so you will be able to get access to that after the fact. Also, in terms of questions, there is a question interface on the GoToWebinar that you have on your screen. Please feel free to submit those throughout the presentation. We are going to go through those at the end and have Anson respond to those. Briefly about SageWorks. SageWorks is based in beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina, and we are a financial information company that provides credit and risk management solutions to financial institutions, as well as data and applications that are used by thousands of financial institutions and accounting firms across America. We are very excited to have Anson Cooley with us today. Anson's firm, Synergy Bank Consulting, specializes in ALLL consulting, loan reviews, as well as providing in-house training for his bank clients. So without further ado, let me please introduce Mr. Anson Cooley.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anson Cooley. As Tim just mentioned, I'm the founder and principal of Synergy Bank Consulting. And what we primarily focus on is ALLL consultations as well as loan reviews. Also, we do some pre-examination preparation. As also, we help financial institutions remediate issues with that come up during their bank examination. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and set the stage for our web today. I was talking with one of my clients, and they call their allowance the Cookie Monster, as you can see up here on the screen. And that's why I said, well, it seems like every time I look around, I have to constantly feed it, and I'm feeding with my earnings, and it's concerning, and I want to figure out a way to better document and understand our budgetary process, and also why we're constantly having to put more and more in our allowance. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to discuss a very specific topic within allowance, which is your qualitative facts. Okay. So briefly, just a housekeeping note, we have a wide range of institutions here on the call today. We have institutions from $100 million to $4 billion on the call, as well as we have different parts, individuals, and with different responsibilities within the institution with a wide range of skills and expertise with the allowance. So some of the topics I may talk about may seem a little elementary for some individuals, and then some topics, if we talk about migration analysis, may seem a little bit high shelf for some other individuals. So just bear with me, because I'm going to try to cover things that can appease both constituents. Feel free to type any questions during the presentation. I'll be available afterwards to fill any questions that you may have offline that you don't want to ask during the presentation or afterwards. So without further ado, let's get started. So if you can look at this graph here, it's basically communicating that over the last 10 years, from 2002 to now, roughly about mid-2012, we've seen an uptick in past dues and non-accruals, or just problem loans, if you will. Please note that the gray shaded area, it indicates the U.S. recession that we're currently on, either still in or on our way out of, depending on your perspective. So you can see the sharp contrast there and how past dues and non-accruals have increased. On this next slide, you see net loan losses as a percentage of average total loans for all U.S. banks. It kind of follows the same trend line with the non-performing loans as well. So this is also looking back from 2002 all the way to 2012. And then here we have our loan loss reserve as a percentage of total loans for all U.S. banks. And so also you notice the shape is the same. As our non-performing loans have increased and as our charge-offs have increased, our loan loss reserves have decreased as well. What we're concerned about primarily, though, what's happening here, because we're noticing that allowance provisions are starting to decrease, and that also falls in line with also banks also starting to level off with their problem assets. This is an interesting slide, though. Here, it's assets at banks whose ALLL exceeds their non-performing loans. So in other words, what percentage of banks' allowance? Right now, only 34% of banks in the U.S. allowance balance covers the amount of non-performing loans in their portfolio. Now look from 2002 to 2008. Roughly about, it was a steady trend, 90% of institutions in the United States had their allowance covering their non-performing loans. But as loan portfolios got weaker and the allowance balances started, the non-performing loans started to exceed the allowance balance, you can see right there in that gray shaded area as indicated by the recession. But we're also starting to see an uptick as non-performing loans start to decrease. But right now, only 34% of institutions' non-performing loans exceed their allowance. So, going back to the Cookie Monster question, my client wanted to figure out how he maybe take less or perhaps make less provisions. But my question to him is, how are you going to document that? And how are you going to support that? Because as I was going through his ratios in particular, he has a severe amount of non-performing loans, and his problem loans aren't leveling off across all his portfolio. So my concern for him is that you just can't take money out of your allowance or reduce your provisions because of earnings concerns. You have to be able to support it with analysis and be able to communicate the trends. So what's the elephant in the room, if you will? In allowance committee meetings, this is a discussion that's happening all across the country, whereas we have slow loan growth, weak earnings, and just to kind of put it out there, a lot of institutions use the allowance or perhaps reducing provisions as a way to normalize or improve earnings. And here's the key. Each institution is unique, and you're responsible to support and document all the provisions and all the additions that you make to your allowance. And it's incumbent on the institution to make sure that you're communicating properly with your auditors and your examiners the whys and the hows behind your allowance methodology. So today we're going to approach this topic, qualitative factors, from a couple of different angles, from you as the financial institution and also from the examiner perspective. So for the agenda today, we're going to discuss what are qualitative factors, what are your regulatory expectations, and as well as improve the documentation of our qualitative factors. So, what is ASC 450-20, or formerly FAST 5, and for the rest of the presentation I'm just going to call it FAST 5. Interagency policy statements on lease losses, the guidance that your allowance methodology must estimate credit losses on a group of loans with similar risk characteristics, homogeneous pools, in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles under ASC 4-20, accounting for contingencies. What does all that mean? And please speak English for me. Okay, quite simply, this is your loan portfolio. Just think of this basket of fruit of your loan portfolio. You have different types of loans. You have credit card loans. You have real estate loans. You have C&I loans. You have commercial real estate loans, all in your loan portfolio basket. Now, all we're really communicating when you say, can you separate them into homogeneous pools, you're taking your different types of loans and you're basically separating the fruit. So if you will, your commercial loans are your apples, and your loans to individuals are your oranges, and your real estate loans are your pears. This is your loan portfolio segmented into homogeneous pools or baskets like fruit, okay? So you have two portions of your FAST 5. You have your historical net charge-offs, which is a backward look at how well these particular loan pools have performed in the past, and your qualitative factors, which is what's currently happening, and it's a forward-looking measure. So commercial loans, your Apple, so for example, your net average loss over, just say 3 years has been 2.25, or loans to individuals, your net average loss has been 1.15, or your real estate loans, net average loss has been 1 for each one of your separate pools that we've made, okay, or your homogeneous pools. So what are your Q factors that allow you to look forward? So your environment factors are used to reflect changes in the collectability of your portfolio not captured by what's happened in the past. These factors augment actual loss experience and help to estimate the probability of loss within a portfolio based on emerging or inherent risk within your portfolio. So these are your normal Q factors that you typically see, and these are straight from the 2006 interagency guidance on the ALLL. And we're going to go, I'm just briefly going to show, we're going to go over, not going to go each one in depth, but these are the core Q factors that we typically see when we review ALLL, do ALLL consultations. But you're not limited to these particular qualitative factors. And what I've noticed is all of them typically aren't used in institutions' allowance analysis. For example, I typically don't see a lot of allocations for the institution's loan review, changes in loan review systems, or changes in experience and ability and depth in lending and management, other relevant staff. And what I'm going to get at today is how you can better support and document by making sure you're communicating why you don't have an allocation for a particular area. So again, your qualitative help you look forward. Your qualitative factors are used to reflect changes in the collectability not captured by the net charge-offs, historical net charge-offs in your portfolio. And just as an aside note, there's different opinions as to which measure you should use for your net historical charge-offs. And what I want to impress on you is that it's management's judgment to decide whether or not you want to use a rolling 12 quarters or a 3-year average or a 5-year average or some type of weight. There are individuals that have preferences as to what they think could be a better measure, but it's incumbent on the institution to decide which measure you're going to use and just be consistent with it. You don't want to 1 quarter use a 3-year average because it gives you a more favorable outlook or a favorable allowance number. Then in the next quarter, use a 5-year and then constantly switch back. You want to use a consistent historical methodology. If you're going to use a 3-year average, use a 3-year average. If you're going to use a rolling 12 quarters, use that. But don't switch back and forth. So what are your regulatory expectations? Simply put, you want to have sound judgment and documentation. So this is just some experts. You always want to go to the guidance itself. And so just a couple of things I want to point out to you to kind of just equip you in your conversations with your examiners and your auditors. It said the determination of your ALLL should be based on management's current judgments about the quality of the loan portfolio. Second, with the board of directors is responsible for overseeing management's significant judgments and estimates pertaining to the appropriate ALLL. Third, determining the appropriate ALLL requires a high degree of management judgment. And that it's important to recognize that because when you're dealing with the qualitative factors, this is the most judgmental portion of your ALLL. Your historical losses are what they are. That's in the past. That can be verified and documented quite easily just by going to your Uniform Bank Performance Report. With your impaired loans, that's also documented. You have to have an updated appraisal of your collateral to support your particular impairment amount. But with your qualitative factors, this is the area that has the highest degree of judgment. Management should maintain responsible documentation to support which factors affected the analysis and the impact of those factors on the loss measurement. So that's important, documentation. So what does my regulatory review of my ALLL consist of? Examiners assess the appropriateness of your allowance in the supporting documentation during their review. They assess the effectiveness of how well your board is oversight in reviewing the ALLL methodology. They look at your allowance policies and your methodology. They assess whether the institution is appropriately considering historical loss experiences, and also they look at your qualitative factors. And one of the things that it happens to a lot of institutions, if you're not documenting the whys and hows as to why you're taking or adding to your Q factors, you leave it up to your examiner or your auditor to kind of guess, if you will, or try to employ their own judgment as opposed to your judgment as to why your local economy is being affected by a factory closing down, if you will. Examiners also look to ensure that they're reviewing your loss estimation models, and also review the appropriateness and reasonableness of your overall ALLL, and they review the adequacy of your documentation. Documentation is so important. What are the most common issues related to exam issues related to qualitative factors? Poor portfolio segmentation. This is real important. For example, imagine, or just in real life here, I have a client that recently purchased 2 institutions that are roughly about 50 miles away from their main location. And what we did with their ALLL, we took their segmentation and we added a geographic segmentation to it, because, for example, I'll use a name. DeKalb, Illinois is more of a rural town here in Illinois, but the Chicagoland area is much different. Well, the institutions that this bank purchased is in the Chicagoland. Should we allocate the same type of qualitative factors that we would for the loans that we have in DeKalb? Is a commercial real estate loan in DeKalb have the same risk as maybe a commercial real estate loan in Chicago? And so what we did, we increased the segmentation, or we further segmented their portfolio to say, okay, we not only now do we just have commercial real estate loans, we have commercial real estate loans in Chicagoland, and now we have commercial real estate loans in the DeKalb area. So further, and that also was that significantly improved the outlook on our ALLL, because we weren't allocating everything all across the board in the same way. Another big issue, and you'll hear in most when examiners give presentations on ALLL, is directional consistency. And it's, if your past dues and non-accruals are increasing, why are your allowance provisions going down at the same time? Or if your classified assets are increasing, or just give an overview, if the asset quality indicators are indicating that your portfolio is weakening, then why isn't your allowance increasing to cover those potential losses? And so you hear a lot about directional consistency, and we're going to go specifically how to address that. And again, just poor documentation. Your examiners coming in and them not being able to understand why you added 25 basis points to one Q factor in a particular portfolio, but took out 75 basis points against another pool in another portfolio. You have to be able to communicate that. Best way to do that is to connect your Q factors to Q factor drivers. And so, for example, changes in lending policies and procedures is one that isn't often used, but what drives that particular Q factor, or what supporting documentation can we use to supplement and support whether or not we have 25 basis points or 50 basis points against a particular pool? And so some of the drivers for this is financial statement exceptions, a high degree of loan documentation waivers. And what do I mean by loan documentation waivers? What's happening is a lot of institutions, when a loan comes up to maturity, either the borrower hasn't provided updated financial statements. There's a lot of bankers are kicking it for another 90 days to give the borrower an opportunity to provide updated financials. Another driver is financial statement exceptions or originating loans without having current financials. So not having current financials and not having the information that you need to properly assess the weakness in a particular credit, that weakens your ability to understand the risk in your portfolio, and that's something that can be accounted for within your Q factors. As I mentioned, directional consistency, one of the qualitative factors is problem loan trends. And one of the drivers is volume and severity of past due loans. What does your 30 to 60, 90-day past due for your commercial real estate portfolio look like? How has that trended over the last 10 quarters? This information is readily available, and it's in your Uniform Bank Performance Report or your UBPR. You can go to that information and at the FFIEC website and create graphs or just get the information directly from it so that you can say, okay, look at my C&I loans and look at how over the last 12 quarters my past dues and my non-accruals have decreased. And so the correlation is over the past 12 quarters, my past dues have decreased, and that's why we went from perhaps, if you will, 75 basis points in that particular pool for past dues and non-accruals to maybe 40 basis points. You're making a correlation between the two, and that's directionally consistent. Also, you want to consider your level of TDRs as well as your level of classified assets. Your level of classified assets that's not communicated on your Uniform Bank Performance Report. You have that internally on your various watch lists, and whether or not you communicate it via special mention or substandard. So you want to make sure that you're assessing that and saying, okay, well, during our last exam or during our last review, our classified assets as a percentage of Tier 1 was 80%. And through our collection efforts and through different modification programs or just borrowers getting on their feet, our classified assets based on our assessment is now at 50% of Tier 1. And so there's some improvement there. But you have to get that documentation in your ALLL to be able to support that to your auditor. Changes in collateral values. This is really big here. You want to make sure that you communicate your declining valuation environment, and also you want to make sure that you're properly communicating the changes that are happening in your particular local environment. For example, you can use Case-Shiller, CoreLogic, and also information as well as from your local realtor to discuss housing trends that are occurring in your specific local market. And you want to make that correlation between maybe housing prices and from the Case-Shiller index, or just housing days on markets. Whatever data you can provide to support what's occurring in your specific location and your specific community, use that to support this particular Q factor. So for example, I've seen institutions put graphs. This is a graph of the Case-Shiller index here. This information can be found at the St. Louis Fed website, and interestingly enough, the SageWorks surety program actually interfaces directly with the St. Louis Fed, so that you can get that information in real time from the St. Louis Fed, so you don't have to go into it each time. Once you set it and say, okay, I want to watch for unemployment numbers in a particular area, once you set that, it'll go up and it'll go to the St. Louis Fed and update once new information comes available. So you note here from within the last year, there's been some improvement in the Dallas, Texas area based on the Case-Shiller index here. And so you want to use that to support that particular changes in collateral values. Let's look at Atlanta. Here's Atlanta from 2011 to 2006. There seems to be, look at the trend, there was a declining trend, but also there seems to be a slight uptick over the last quarter here. And so you just want to make sure that you're getting the information that's relevant to your community, and also relevant to your institution to support each Q factor. So you're documenting your qualitative factors. One of them that I've noticed that it's always, not always, but most of the time left blank and doesn't have something against it, is changes in experience, ability, and depth of lending management, other relevant staff. You always see something in volume and severity of past due loans, but changes in experience, ability, and depth usually is left blank for a lot of institutions. And what I'm recognizing is there's a change occurring between, a lot of community banks are shifting their focus from commercial real estate lending to now C&I lending. And if, just for example, if you're a lender or if you're a community bank that has been doing a lot of commercial real estate lending over the last 5 or 6 years, C&I lending is a different animal. So the same type of credit analyst or the same staff or the same control mechanisms that you use to manage your commercial real estate portfolio isn't the same skill set that you need to manage a C&I portfolio. And so it's time to take another look at this particular Q factor and assess, hey, there is a weakness there in our C&I expertise. All of our, if we do it, for example, have a client, we're looking at their loan presentations and they're getting a lot of C&I opportunities, yet they're assessing their C&I loans using commercial real estate methodology, just traditional cash flow, for example, whereby they're taking the net income back depreciation and interest and things of that nature. Well, when you're looking at a C&I loan, you want to use more sophisticated measures. You want to consider UCA cash flow. You want to consider free cash flow measures. And so you want to make sure that you're accounting for your knowledge and your specialty and or lack thereof in this particular area of this Q factors. Okay. Also, changes in the quality of your loan review. Your loan review is your radar, if you will. If your loan review program is, if you're going through some turnover, or if you've recently switched loan review firms or what have you, if your loan review process is broken, you won't know what's coming down the pipeline. And so you won't know when you need to assess a loan for impairment, perhaps. You have to make sure that you're properly reviewing your loan review process and making sure if you have to account for it in your quality factors, you do that here. The changes in the existence of the different concentrations. A lot of, as I mentioned, the institutions are shifting from commercial real estate to C&I, and so if you're creating another concentration, you want to make sure you account for that with this by documenting within this particular Q factor. So, what are some keys to improving your documentation of your qualitative? One big thing is don't wait till the last day before your board meeting to document your qualitative factors. I see this a lot. At each institution, different levels of people are involved. At some banks you go into, there's one person in a spreadsheet, and he or she is responsible for putting together the qualitative figures and putting together the everything themselves, and it's just a process. But when you think about the process and the amount of money involved, it's incumbent of institutions to put more time into documenting and putting more resources behind documenting your qualitative factors. So share the load. Use a team approach to documenting your qualitative factors. The allowance process is one of the places where credit and accounting kind of intersect. And so I found the best processes occur when you have your senior lender or your chief risk officer or credit officer meeting with the CFO and discuss the ALLL, discussing accounting issues related to impairment or just understanding the budgetary process. When those two individuals are sitting at the same table, I've noticed that you get a better quality product when you have your chief credit officer, your senior lender, and your CFO all involved in the allowance process. But a lot of times it's either one or the other. Either the CFO does the allowance all by himself, or the senior lender does the allowance all by himself. But sometimes it's better if you use a team approach. Every time you change your qualitative factors, make sure you have the corresponding data to support the change. So as we mentioned, directional consistency is key. Document in your ALLL methodology the financial indicators that drive the changes to your Q factors. And after the webinar, I'm going to send out a job aid that kind of for each one of the qualitative factors, different drivers that you can use to support them, and some links to information that you can get. Okay, but also you just want to say, here's my allowance policy. So for changes in past dues and non-accruals and changes in our problem loans, we're going to use the 30, 60 to 90-day ratio. We're going to use our classified assets ratio. We're going to use the non-accrual ratio to support that. These are the drivers of that particular Q factor. So when I pick it up, or when your examiner picks it up, they understand what's the rhyme and reason why you've made changes to your qualitative factors. Use the free information available on the internet to support your allowance. There's information out there. Again, there's the St. Louis Fed. They have a program called FRED that's very easy to use. You can create some really neat graphs that can really help communicate and document your allowance. Also use a Uniform Bank Performance Report. Go into it on page 6 and 7. There's your past due information as well as your allowance information. Dig into that and spend some time with that, so that when you're examining, it's the same information that your examiner is looking at to assess whether or not your allowance makes sense. So it makes sense on the other side for you to understand and be able to communicate and tell the story behind the changes to your allowance. 6, use the process of documenting your qualitative factors as an opportunity to assess your current economic environment, trends in your loan portfolio, and risk management practices. So it makes good business sense just to spend more time with your qualitative factors. You have an opportunity to look at your local economy, the national economy. You can assess your loan review. You can assess your lending staff. You have opportunity to look at your past dues and look at your concentrations, all in one place just by looking at this process. And so it just merits more time and effort to be put into it than what you may be doing at this point in time. And 7, incorporate the data from your portfolio stress test process into your ALLL documentation. So if you're currently stress testing your loan portfolio, and for example, if you stress test your commercial real estate portfolio and say, well, if X percentage of our loans were to have a decrease in their asset value, in their collateral value, this is what the outcome would be. Use that data to support what you're putting in your allowance. And so if you're stress testing your portfolio, get some additional usage out of that information by incorporating it into your ALLL documentation. And so these are just some keys. We're coming toward the end of the webinar or the presentation portion of it. I know we probably have some good questions here about how you can better document a specific Q factor, or just on an allowance in general. We're getting ready to open it up for questions. Please feel free to type in your question. Again, my name is Anson Cooley, and I'm the principal at Synergy Bank Consulting. If you have any questions or have any want to talk offline, my email is here, as well as my website. And again, here's the information about SageWorks. Some helpful links. SageWorks' website is full of information and blog information, good information about the ALLL, global cash flow, and other credit risk management information. Again, thank you for attending this webinar. Hopefully you were able to kind of glean some different useful information about the qualitative factors and how you can better document it. Again, as I mentioned, there's a job aid that I'll be sending out to the attendees that you can use as a guide for each one of the qualitative factors, how you can just say, okay, I'm doing my ALLL next month. I'm trying to remember what was stated in the webinar, that the job aid is going to be a good supplement for you. Again, thank you. And Tim, do you have any questions?
We do, Anson. Thanks. Yeah, we've had some questions come in. First question is, do you have some specific examples of examiner-approved factor documentation? And I think you touched on that a little bit, but maybe you could expand on some of the things you've seen that have been approved, so to speak, by the examining community.
Well, and I'll just be as even and as blunt as possible. There's no, when you say examiner-approved Q-factor documentation, there isn't anything, I guess, examiner-approved. I think most individuals on this call have experience that you may have your allowance looked at one exam, and you think it's fine, and then you have another examination, somebody tells you that you need to improve your documentation or something's off with it. So there's nothing specific, but what I would recommend is that to make sure that it just makes sense in that, for example, if we're talking about past dues and non-accruals, then go to Uniform Bank Performance Report, look at page 6 and 7, and look at your past dues and non-accruals and that information on that specific page and use that to support it. For your changes in local economy, I've seen unemployment rates. I've seen changes in the home prices, those are things, but there's nothing really specific. Just make sure, again, as we discussed, it's management's judgment with the ALLL. You just want to make sure that it makes sense and that it correlates and that it's directionally consistent. So there isn't any, for as far as support, there isn't like use this indicator, use another indicator. Use indicators that correlate to the risk in each portfolio.
Another question, would significant updated training of credit analysts and underwriters and credit analysis be something you could use as a documentation for the Q factor related to experience of staff? Okay.
Yes, but also I would also supplement that with perhaps a recent loan review. So maybe you've taken 3 credit analysts and you've sent them to some training, maybe some training on C&I lending, and they're doing more annual reviews, and also they've updated their knowledge about specific aspects of C&I lending. You want to document the training that they've gone, but then also I would supplement it and say, well, we recently had a loan review and we had a lower amount of risk rating changes than we've had in the past related to that particular portfolio. So we went to training, and subsequent to that, we had an exam or a loan review, and based on that, they noted the improvement, so therefore we reduced our allocation in that particular pool.
Answer another question. Do most institutions develop a range of changes, Q factors, based on changes in factors such as economic factors?
Yes. And so, but the ranges, and here's the thing where it gets real subjective. The reasoning behind the ranges, for example, what indicates a moderate change, or what indicates a severe change, and what should be the correlating effect of that severe moderate change? You want to document that. So if, for example, and I'm just visualizing this, for your commercial real estate portfolio, the Q factor would be past dues and non-accruals. Say last quarter you had it severe. And so because you had it severe, you allocated 0.75 basis points. And now you've seen the trend decline in past dues and non-accruals, and now you feel like it's moderate. If you go from 75 to 50, you've reduced it 25 basis points, but I can't say that that's specifically that 25 basis points is the right number, or if you go from severe to low, you should reduce it 30 basis points. That's where the judgment comes in, but you want to make sure that you have a mechanism and a process in place so that you're consistent in the increments in which changing your Q factors. And if it's somebody, I have some examples of, so for the person that asked that question, if you would like an example of it, feel free to reach out and shoot me an email. I can provide you with some examples of those mechanisms.
Anson, kind of a higher level question here. Given the scrutiny over the last 3 years by regulators, have you seen a significant improvement in ALLL methodology, or is there still a lot of room to improve?
There's a lot of room to improve on the documentation side. I would definitely say that. So sometimes, like when I come in and do an ALLL consultation, I'm not in like a gotcha mode or anything like that. It's just a conversation, and it's what it really is it makes you wonder, I guess, for the amount of time that the individual is putting into this ALLL, and then the amount of money that the individual responsible of the ALLL can actually spend. Like you can click with the click of a button and adding basis points to a qualitative factor, add $150,000 to $200,000, or depending on your institution, add $1 million to your allowance. But yet, we're only spending a day or 2 days to make those decisions. So when you look at the amount of money involved in the effect on earnings, and you put it in perspective with the time that we're actually spending documenting and supporting our qualitative factors, it doesn't match up. And so we're seeing the improvement, specifically with allowance, in that institutions are getting better at updating their appraisal values more frequently, or just understanding how to properly communicate their allowance. But the qualitative factor, it just needs to improve, because it facilitates your documentation, facilitates an educated conversation with your examiner, because you don't want someone just to come in and say, well, I think you should have X in this Q factor, and they don't have I guess a documented reason other than the fact that that's what they think. If you set the playing field with your documentation and your support, then that's what the conversation will revolve around.
Anson, thank you for that, and thank you for the presentation today. We really enjoyed it and found it really insightful. We do have several other questions that have come in. A lot of them are fairly specific, so I think it probably would make more sense to have you follow up after the session. So we'll pass those along, Anson, and he should be able to reach out to you in response to those. Beyond that, thanks to everyone for their attendance today. We are going to be continuing this series of webinars. We should have another one in October. Please check our website for details on that. And thanks very much again for the time. Have a great day.
Thank you.